Hello, and welcome to another of our Catholic Concern for Animals vlogs. Today we are pleased to welcome one of our friends from the United States of America, Jonnah Dee Popek, who is here to talk about her veganism and the way that connects with her faith, and we hope to talk about fish a bit as well. So let me start off, Jonnah, by asking you about how your veganism arises from your beliefs and from your faith.
Yeah, so I've been Christian my whole life. I converted to Catholicism a couple years ago, but I've been vegan for 5 years. So when I started off on my vegan journey, it was primarily for health reasons. I had high cholesterol at the time, which since has been healed on this vegan diet. And then about a year after being fully plant-based, I was learning a lot about the ethical side of veganism, and a lot of it really resonated with me. And I think I wouldn't have been necessarily open to hearing those arguments if I hadn't already proved to myself that I can totally sustain myself with just plants. And so then to hear about what actually goes on in animal agriculture and all the suffering that the animals experience, it just made perfect sense to me to not eat them, and to not be involved in that for ethical reasons, because it's unnecessary. And then when I was becoming Catholic and I was looking into the Catechism of the Catholic Church about what are the church teachings about animals, I was actually quite encouraged at the quote from the Catechism that says it's contrary to human dignity to cause animals to suffer or die needlessly. And so then it just made perfect sense to me that, like, obviously it's not necessary for us to be causing the suffering and death of animals, because we can sustain ourselves and actually be healthier by eating plants. So that's been a lot of my journey. That's just like a little snippet of it, but I've become quite passionate. I'm actually going to be leading a vegan Lent group here at the church that I work at. So.
Yeah, well, we've just entered Lent. I mean, what do periods like Lent and Advent present particular issues for you with respect to veganism and Catholicism?
It's interesting because throughout church history, a lot of the church has actually been vegan or vegetarian, and particularly during the seasons of Advent and Lent. And the Eastern Orthodox Church still typically does that. But in the Catholic Church, I think things have gotten a bit more lenient over the years, and maybe that's just to give the faithful more of an opportunity to decide for ourselves and exercise our own conscience with it. But I would love to see more Catholics going vegan, especially for the seasons of Lent and Advent. And right now in the season of Lent, you know, we're focusing on the suffering of our Lord and trying to enter into that and empathize with him on this journey as he prepares to go to the cross. And yet so many people are causing suffering and death unnecessarily every day. And I'm not being judgmental when I say that, because I did that for most of my life and I wasn't convicted about it. And I think there's a disconnect because the vast majority of people who are eating the animal products are not actually involved in the killing. So there's a mental disconnect, but it's kind of like the idea of the argument about, like, you don't want to consume something that was produced in an unethical way, because then you're creating a demand for the unethical practice. And so it's a matter of discerning, like, is this necessary? Which I would say it's not. And if it's not necessary, how is that ethical?
And you're leading a group with regarding to these issues in the next days and weeks, aren't you? So how does that fit in with things? I mean, what will be the purpose of that?
Yeah, so we're gonna get together once a week and have share a vegan meal, and everyone in the group is focusing on veganism for Lent, and we're going to be doing a book study. We're going to be discussing the book Change the Food, Change the World, which is actually written by 2 Catholic women, and it's endorsed by a couple Catholic priests. And so I'm excited about that. That it's been a good book for me to read, to just kind of reaffirm and contemplate how the Catholic faith like interacts with these kinds of views. And yeah, it's been quite encouraging. So I'm looking forward to that. We have several people from the community who are going to be participating as well. So I see it as a neat evangelistic opportunity. So people who are interested in veganism coming to a church and learning about how the Catholic faith actually aligns really well with this lifestyle.
And about 5 years ago now, of course, Pope Francis published the encyclical Laudato Si. Did that have any impact on your views, and has it had since you become a Catholic?
Yeah, so I actually just finally read the Laudato Si about a year ago, or a little less than a year ago, and I was so encouraged by it, and especially the language about how the animals are like our brothers and sisters, and that's like how Saint Francis spoke about the animals, and just viewing like this is our role as humans, to steward creation and to treat animals with care, and to take care of the environment. And I was very encouraged by that. Honestly, after reading that, I was like, how is Pope Francis not vegan after writing this? But everyone's on their own journey, I guess.
Indeed we are. Chris, how does events in Lent in Britain fit in with all this? Are there any particular issues with respect to that?
Well, absolutely. There's the same issues apply in the UK as in the US, and basically anywhere, actually. That we put a tweet out this morning about Lent, saying that we would like Catholics, wherever they are in the world, to have a vegan Lent, a very happy vegan Lent. And we'll also be majoring this year on the issue of fish as well in that whole debate, because as Jonnah certainly knows, in the United States there is a tradition, and not only in the United States but elsewhere, of saying, all right, I'm going to give up meat for Lent or meat for Advent, but I'm going to eat fish instead. Well, that to us doesn't make any logical sense whatsoever. So we're saying, as an organization, generally, we'd like you to give up meat for Lent. In fact, all animal products, actually, not just only your dietary animal products. And certainly, that's step one. Would be great for people to do that. But certainly, if you're going on that road, don't think about replacing your lamb or your beef or your chicken or whatever it is you're not eating for Lent because you want to give up for Lent. don't replace that with a fish. You know, give up. You know, start eating aubergines and lentils or whatever it is you want to eat. So generally, the message is exactly the same, whether it's in the US, the UK, or anywhere else. And I'm particularly encouraged by what I'm hearing about this vegan Lent group within the church in the US that is being settled. That's a fantastic thing. Because not only are people having shared meal together, which is a good thing, especially during this pandemic, actually. The opportunity for shared meals in the UK is actually not possible because we're not allowed to meet, actually. Our churches are closed. So that's a great thing that you're actually having shared vegan meals. That's wonderful. But also having discussion groups around that as well. So it's fantastic news what we're hearing from the US just now. So I'm really, really pleased. And it ties in absolutely with the general CCA message for Lent that we just issued this morning.
How well is this message going down in the US, Jonnah, from your perspective? I mean, obviously you're in one part of the US; it's a big country, but from your perspective and what you see, I mean, are your kind of views on veganism widely held within the Catholic community over there?
I would say that my views are definitely still in the minority, but people are more open-minded to it. And I think it's kind of like, okay, if you go to a store and you see a new product, it generally takes like several times of you seeing that product before you're like, maybe I'll try that. And so I think people are becoming more open-minded to veganism because they're seeing it. These products are in grocery stores, and I mean, plants have always been in grocery stores, but like specifically like vegan alternatives and stuff. So people are starting to be like, this is interesting. What is behind this? And then to also have it in the church, this message, it is causing people to think. And I've had some really great discussions with people. I found that most people in the church are kind and open-minded to having discussions, like how Pope Francis talks about in his encyclical of Fratelli Tutti. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but about like seeking brotherly and sisterly kindness and pursuing unity through dialogue. And I found that to be really effective. I just had a conversation with one of our parishioners not too long ago about veganism, because it's interesting, because even though we're having this vegan Lent group here, we're also having fish fries going on at the same time. So a group of men doing a fundraiser is selling fish every Friday for Lent. And that's a real tradition here in the United States, is for Catholic churches to sell fish on Fridays, because like how Chris was saying, it's not thought of to be meat. And so it's just an interesting tradition. And so I had a conversation with someone about like, okay, well, this is my perspective. And he was really open-minded about it, and it really got him thinking. So people are at different places on the journey, though, with what they would be open to changing in their actual life. But for most of the people that I have spoken with, it makes sense. Like the vegan mentalities, the arguments for this way of life, it makes a lot of sense. It's just a matter of, are people ready to make the change? And that's where it's difficult for a lot of people. Change can be hard. So, yeah.
Yes, indeed. It's interesting as well, because you mentioned that you came to the veganism from a health perspective, but a lot of other people come to it from a moral and ethical perspective, particularly in terms of how resource intensive raising meat and raising fish in aquaculture can be. There are a large proportion of caught wild fish are now caught to feed fish in aquaculture, which seems absolutely crazy. So it does seem to fit in with a number of different moral and ethical aspects which the church should be concerned about.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one thing that is interesting to me, because a lot of times if I have a question about what is right or what is God's will, I look to nature and I look to science, because nature and science confirms like God's will. So it's been interesting, because the more that I look into health and health research and science, this lifestyle is the healthiest. And we know, like the Smithsonian put out an article a few years back about how fish feel pain. Like, it is very clear from the science now that fish feel pain. And so if we can align our ethics with the science that is, in nature, it makes a lot of sense in my mind, like seeking God's will, that he would want us to do what's healthiest for us, and he wants us to do what takes the best care of his creation, and that isn't causing unnecessary suffering and death. And so it makes total sense that all of those things would align. Like, this lifestyle is the healthiest. It is best for the environment. It does cause the least amount of suffering. So it just seems quite straightforward to me once I look into these things. And from a fish, on the topic of fish, it's interesting because fish have cholesterol just like any other animal products. And I didn't know much about cholesterol until I watched the documentary Forks Over Knives, and I learned about how, like, oh, we don't need to be eating any cholesterol because our body makes its own. And it's when we eat cholesterol that it gets out of balance in our body. And the only form of dietary cholesterol is animal products. No plants have the cholesterol. So it was very, very interesting. And also, I'm very big on holistic wellness of body, mind, and spirit, and how it's all interconnected. And so everything that we do has effects spiritually. And so it's very interesting to me that when we eat animal products, including fish, there's cholesterol, which, what does cholesterol do? It blocks our arteries. So it actually, when the Bible talks about like having a soft heart and don't let your hearts be hardened, and then I think about the physical aspect of what happens when we eat animal products. It actually like causes heart disease and heart attacks from essentially hardening our hearts, like, so it all aligns in my mind.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the interesting things about the Laudato Si was the way, like, as you mentioned about science there confirming your beliefs, and the Laudato Si, because science is contended. I mean, you mentioned the growing evidence about fish feeling pain, and there's also evidence as well about their abilities, their understanding, their sentience, as John Balcom would put it. I think Laudato Si talks about the creation working together as a whole, and us regarding creatures as important, as worthwhile, because they are part of the whole creation, as indeed we are. We are part of the whole creation. And I think that's certainly one thing which has not happened with fish, the way in which we've treated fish, the number of fish we've dragged from the oceans, and the changes we've made to the oceans itself, and the oceans as an environment and as an ecosphere. I think that, as you said, I mean, science seems to work. A lot of the developments in science seem to work well with the ideas in Laudato Si, and this idea of the world as a creation which we should respect all parts of.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's all intertwined, like all of creation. And so it's interesting that when sometimes people say that vegans care more about animals than we care about people, and that's not true at all. And it's actually how we treat animals. It comes back to us, because we want to live in a world where there are animals and there are trees, and that the oceans are thriving, and it's and also in a spiritual sense, like, do we want to be causing unnecessary death and destruction, and what is the effect of that on our hearts? Regardless of if it's towards another human or towards an animal, like, none of it is good.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, sorry, you were trying to get in there.
Just a few points on what's been said, and I'm very interested to hear about the conversation inside the church there with the people who are still doing the fish fries on a Friday, and that was very interesting, because you've got your group working here, and you've got this group, I won't say over there, but somewhat slightly to a different place, but you're having conversations with them, and they're understanding your point of view. They may or may not agree, and they may or may not change behavior, but they're hearing your view. And this is the key. This is the key to what CCA does generally. A lot of what we say has never been told to the Catholic community before, for whatever reason. I don't want to go down the reasons why that may not have happened, but people are hearing things for the first time. And that is absolutely what we are here to do. So you're absolutely doing our work right there, in situ, so to speak, within your local church community. And that's fantastic. Not only are you doing the proactive work in having your vegan Lent group, but you're actually talking to people who are not yet ready to join your group, but who knows, next year they may be with you. That man may be with you in vegan Lent next year. But also the general conversations about Laudato Si, and about one of the things you mentioned was products and getting used to new products. And I think they say that it takes you between 4 and 6 weeks to learn a new habit, to get habit changed in your life, repeatedly changing the behavior to get it becomes a habit, a new habit. And just products was interesting, because I think all people who change their diet and become vegetarian or vegan or flexitarian or whatever, they think they're giving up something. Now, I'm not having that anymore, which is obviously why Lent is a very good time to be discussing it. I'm giving something up, which I don't want to do, but I'm doing it for whatever reason. And you mentioned, and this is a little aside, you mentioned new products, and there are certainly in the UK, and I'm sure in the US and elsewhere, new products coming all the time for vegans, certainly here. And that's because the people who are moving to vegan diets is increasing. So the supermarkets and the producers are meeting that demand. Good old supply and demand economics coming in here. They feel more people buying it, we'll supply it for them. And the reason I'm going down this road is that I heard last week in the UK, and you may not have heard of this particular confectionery. It's called a Kit Kat. Called a Kit Kat, and I've always loved Kit Kats before I went vegan. Then I couldn't eat them because they're milk chocolate. They're going to make a vegan Kit Kat. It's coming out soon. I can't wait to get to my supermarket to stock up on vegan Kit Kats when they arrive. And we had a thing last year about vegan sausage roll. But there's all these things, that products are now more and more being produced. So it's a semi-humorous thing, but it's also important that people, the producers can, you don't have to have meat, animal-based products. You can have, vegan Kit Kats. You can have vegan Galaxy bars if you're into chocolate, these sort of things. You can have vegan chocolate. You have vegan cheese. All these things are available now. You don't have to eat. And as we mentioned, a lot of it is because people, A, haven't been told any different for whatever reason, or have just grown up with a particular lifestyle. They were fed meat as children, and they've just always continued with it, because why would you change until you have a reason to change? And one of the things that's interesting about today, I mentioned that the CCA tweets that's gone out, but also here in the UK, the Bishop of Salford, Bishop John Arnold, who also happens to be the Bishop for the Environment in the UK Bishops' Conference, so very important member of our senior clergy, has launched in his diocese the Guardians of Creation today for Lent. Very interesting program he's got called Guardians of Creation. And you were mentioning, weren't you, about how we're stewards. And the Guardians is a very good expression. Not we're stewards of creation, but also guardians of creation. So I'm very interested to speak to Bishop John more about his project for Lent in his diocese. And we may be doing that as well. So there's all sorts of very, very interesting initiatives for Lent that CCA are very supportive of. And what you're doing there and speaking to people, both have already got the message and are part of your vegan group, but also the people who are still having their fish. But once they start thinking about it, who knows? Next year, there might be less in the fish group and more in your group, and we can hope for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think it's a very interesting term. I must admit, when I saw it, the Guardians of Creation, it kind of strikes me as being a bit, something like a Disney film. Maybe we should make sure the film franchise rights are ours. Guardians of the
Galaxy, it isn't a superhero film,
Well, I don't know. I mean, aren't we all superheroes if we do the right thing? I think it is worthwhile considering the fact that we all have a duty to guard the creation, to guard what is here, not in the sense of kind of like trying to preserve everything in aspect, but in terms of actually respecting the way everything works together, the way in which all of the creatures and indeed the plants and everything around us works together, and dealing with that in a dignified manner rather than the way we do.
Well, you've got to see, when you say these things, my mind goes off at a tangent. And I love the Guardians of the Galaxy films that came out.
Yeah.
And now I'm thinking, what would the soundtrack be for the 1970s for Guardians?
Guardians of Creation. Yeah.
So a soundtrack. The soundtrack's a key part of those Guardians of the Galaxy films.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll have to work on that one, Chris.
Let's get back off that theme.
Yes, indeed.
Movies.
So, in terms of kind of people understanding the idea of respecting creation, because from looking at America from over here, Jonnah, we kind of like tend to see, the kind of the image of America in terms of things like hunting and fishing being part of the social psyche out there. Is that something which is a real problem in terms of getting kind of people to understand the message of veganism and the message within the Catholic community about respecting creation?
I would say yes and no. It depends. It depends so much on the individual. I have a friend who she went fishing one time, and she got the fish and like saw how the hook was in its mouth and everything, and she was just so appalled at it that she like took the hook out and threw the fish back and like never wanted to do that again. And so actually the fact that these things are part of our culture can help people to connect more with what's actually going on. And I'm from Kentucky, and I don't know if you guys have ever heard of frog gigging, but it's really awful. But because it's so accepted to go out and hunt frogs, I thought that I would try it sometime as like an adventurous thing with a friend of mine when I was in college, pre-vegan days. And I like that memory is like, it is just like stored in my brain forever now. And just like how violent that was, and just the fact that like we didn't need to do it. Like we were doing it for fun. And that is just horrible. But I think that the fact that people have these actual experiences of like watching these animals die and being the cause of it, it does something to you. Like some people are certainly in denial of it. There's like a, what is that called? Like a mental disconnect. But some people have come to a greater awakening of compassion for animals because of having these experiences. So yeah, it's interesting.
It's a mixed bag.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, well, I think that's true of all national cultures. I mean, we've certainly got some mixed bags over here. But we've been involved in this fish project for the last few months, and we will be for the next year. Is there a kind of different attitude to kind of eating fish than eating other animals because of the kind of hunting culture?
Yeah, especially where I live, which is like on the coast, fishing is a big part of life, and you always see like boats out and stuff. And there's a whole like bay where people go fishing. And I think people do have a different perspective about fish in particular compared to other animals, from a variety of different modes, right? Like people think it's healthier than other meat, which actually it's not. And people think that like, oh, it's sustainable, which actually it's definitely not. I mean, you know, I'm not condemning like people who fish, especially if like that is the only way that they're going to get food, like then that would qualify as a need. But for most people, we can get our needs met with just plants, and they're readily available, you know. But I read a statistic that's been supported from a few different sources that in the next 30 years, if the demand for fish stays as it is right now, we're going to have entire oceans that are depleted of fish, which is just wild to even fathom. Like 30 years, that is not that long.
Well, the changes which have happened, I mean, from the end of the Second World War onwards, are already immense in terms of the amount of fish that have been taken and the changes that's made to the ecosystem. And with respect to the whole kind of culture, I mean, you said about not wanting to condemn people, and I would agree with that. I don't think it's our well, it's for us to condemn individuals for what they do. But what we can do is talk about how society communities may do things better and differently to help people achieve their needs without the requirement of taking these kind of actions. And do you think there's kind of like a debate in the US about how society can improve its support for people so that they don't feel that this is something which is something they are forced into, that is their only alternative?
Yeah, absolutely. I think about that a lot. Like, how can we change the systems and the culture so that it's easier for people to transition and have all of their needs met? And I think there's a lot of different facets to that. I think that we definitely need to be looking from a systemic perspective of, like, we need to supply jobs for people that they can stop working in the fishing industry or whatever other animal agriculture industry, and they can transition to something else. And we need to make sure that healthy plant-based products are available, like, for everyone. And there's a lot of places, particularly in the United States, that are deemed as food deserts because there's not like good access to grocery stores and healthy food. So some people, they get their food from like gas stations, which has like chips and hot dogs and stuff. And so I think there's a lot of different aspects to that. But certainly the government could be doing a better job. There's a lot of lobbyists for animal agriculture that have a hand in what goes on governmentally. And even recently, the USDA came out with their food guide for everyone, which includes 3 servings of dairy per day as recommended, which is just insane, especially considering that the majority of the population has a lactose intolerance. And so yeah, you can definitely see how different industries have had their hand in policy making and stuff. And then compare that to Canada, where dairy has been taken entirely off of the food guide. And so then what does the government do with our tax money? You know, they actually subsidize animal agriculture, which is why animal products are affordable as they are. They should be way more expensive. And if we actually put things in balance, in that regard, plants would be a lot more affordable, and then the plant agriculture could be more subsidized, especially. So there's a whole spectrum of things, like in most things, you know, with what is better for the environment. And even a lot of plant agriculture isn't the best for the environment because there's so much monocropping and also spraying with chemicals, which I think isn't as common in Europe, with GMOs not being much of a thing. But here in the United States, there's like GMOs, there's all this spraying of chemicals, which then goes into runoff and is also bad for the ecosystem and everything. But then we also eat it and it isn't good for our health. And so there's a spectrum, and I think the government could be doing more to make it a priority to help to fund transitions to more sustainable plant agriculture, such as permaculture and organic, you know.
I think one of the things which has really kind of like sparked awareness of of the food web, as many people call it now, in this country has been plastics and the breakdown of plastics in the ocean, and the fact that that's ingested by many ocean creatures and then ingested by people who eat them. But I mean, that, as you say, I mean, you know, the pollution runoff from chemicals is as big, if not a bigger issue, and indeed in of other aspects as well. I was going to say that one of the things I think, you know, that strikes me about the United States is that socially over there you have a far more of a focus on communities and localities and on the local area, whereas we in Britain in particular tend to be very centralised and top down. Is one of the reasons why you got rid of us, and I can't say I blame you for that. I was just wondering if that enabled individuals like you and the church to have a different form of engagement over these kind of issues.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there is a lot of local focus here, and people feel empowered to make a difference in our local communities. And I just recently moved to this area a few months ago, so I'm not super involved in what's going on that much locally, but I am in a vegan Facebook group for my town, and there's over 2,000 people in it, so that's exciting.
Yeah,
very good.
But yeah, I think people do feel a sense of hope and empowerment to get involved and make changes in our community. I think there's a lot of opportunity for that. There's in particular in my town, a lot of younger people and the younger families are moving here, and there is a sense of hope and that positive changes are being made. We have there's a co-op grocery store in town which focuses on local and sustainable and natural kinds of options for people. Unfortunately, it's not a vegan only grocery store, but you know, someday.
Yeah, it'll come.
Yeah.
Chris, is there anything else that you want to talk about?
No, I think that's been a very interesting discussion. Again, I blame you for this. My mind has been all sort about Hollywood and films, and when you were talking there, Jonnah, about crop spraying, I immediately started thinking about North by Northwest and Cary Grant being attacked by that the famous scene out of North by Northwest. You know, so I've got this Hollywood theme has been coming through all the way through. But going back to the serious points, I think that from what I understand of the USA going forward, there are some very forward-thinking individuals in the country about looking to take on the might and power of the industrial farming lobby that you were referring to, and it's the same in the UK. You know, the lobbies in support of the industrialized farming industries are very powerful, and they're very entrenched. And getting you know, change is not easy. But I see from what I read that there are some very forward-thinking people in the US who are taking this forward, and of course you're one of those, and within the Catholic Church. So I'm very pleased that you're with us here on that perspective. But you know, I'm hearing people. I think I was right in saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, that Senator Warren was talking out getting rid of factory farming in 20 years. I don't think I think I read that, which is an incredibly ambitious project, I have to say. But I believe she's mentioned that somewhere in the last year to 18 months. I wish we had that sort of foresight in the United Kingdom, frankly, because that's a very ambitious pledge if that's what she has actually said. So I think although the farming lobby, both in the US and Europe and elsewhere, is very powerful, and to take these things on is not easy. I think there is hope, And I said, and a lot of the hope comes from people themselves who are changing their attitudes. And the more we speak to people, like you're doing literally now during in your church, and the more we do as an organization, people are changing. And as you indicate, you're living proof of, people might first have changed their dietary choices because of health, and then you moved on to think about also the ethical reasons why of your diet and your choices. Lots of people are changing their behavior and dietary issues because of the health issues that they're hearing about, whether it is crop sprayed plants and I want to buy organic if I can instead, or whether it is I don't want to eat a chicken that's been brought up in such a horrible condition, or whatever it is. There is a shift, I think, and we're seeing a shift of opinion by the public, and the public will drive the producers. Actually, you know, that vegan Kit Kat that's coming my way soon is a good example. You know, and the vegan sausage roll, and all these things are now becoming mainstay. Actually, it's only a year ago, this vegan sausage roll, and it was enormously popular when it was launched by this particular baker, and their profits went through the roof on the back of it, actually. So other people have seen the effect. I say, well, they're making a fortune by it. We want to get into this market as well. So I think it's a lot of positive things to be taken.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a tendency to like see the whole like big picture of the world and like want to like bring about world peace like today. And I get a lot of peace from the Serenity Prayer. If you're familiar with the Serenity Prayer, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And so I feel empowered to bring about change and do the things that are in my scope of control to do, and leave the rest to God and trust that God is sovereign over this. And I see an awakening happening, which is definitely a God thing. You know, like I don't have to be Superwoman and change the whole world right now, but I can do my part. So I get a lot of peace from that.
You're certainly doing your part, and we're very grateful you're part of the CCA family. Really, really pleased.
And I think that's an important message as well. I mean, you know, if people just change their part of the world, you know, then that would be a revolution in itself, in terms of our future, and something which, you know, certainly we should consider. I must, you know, now you've got me on the films, and I was reading recently Dan Pauly, who mentioned The Perfect Storm. Which of course is based on a real event, and he was pointing out that the fishing vehicle, the fishing ship on The Perfect Storm, would not have been in that ocean, would not have been where it was to experience those events, had it not been for the overfishing in the areas that it normally went to and normally fished in. So it was overfishing which directly caused the sinking of that vessel. That was featured in The Perfect Storm, and I think that's an interesting thing as well. And we haven't actually mentioned one of the biggest health issues, which is the mixing. Back to your Kit Kats, you see, the mixing of animal fats with sugars, and the effect that has on obesity and the rise in obesity across the developed world in recent years. So, you know, I think all of these things are important and fit in. Well, Jonnah, it has been a pleasure. Is there anything you want to add? Anything else you want to say before we end this conversation?
Yeah, I just want to encourage both of you and just thank you so much for your time and your work in this Catholic Concern for Animals. And I've been super encouraged that this organization exists, and it's really helpful to have the feeling of like, okay, I'm not alone in this. There's a bunch of us who are, you know, warriors in this movement, and peaceful warriors.
Indeed.
So thank you for what you're doing.
Well, thank you for being part of our conversation today, and I for one have greatly enjoyed talking to you over the last half hour or so, and thank you again, Chris. And I'd just like to say that's the end of this vlog for Catholic Concern for Animals. We look forward to seeing you again in the future with future vlogs on YouTube. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.